Welcome to tonight's shir. Tonight's shir is dedicated by Pinchas Rabin and his family in memory of Reb Moshe ben Mordechai, who passed away the 4th of Adar Aleph, Tov Shin Lamed Gimel, and also as a merit for Refuah Shlema for his brother, Reb Chaim Shmuel Mendel ben Chana Rezel, should have a Refuah Shlema. We're already now into Adar, Mishanichnas Adar Marbe Mesimcha. And those who remember in Tov Shin Nun Beis, the Rebbe spoke about the idea of 60. The two Adars, including, I guess, the first day of Rosh Chodesh, which was Friday. So you have 60 days, and the Rebbe was seeking to achieve the inyan of Bittul B'Shishim. That seems to have been the thinking there. Unfortunately, we had there was a tragedy at the beginning of that month with the parsha with Lapine, and later there was Chav Zayin Adar. The Eivishter will help in that we should have a Bittul B'Shishim of all negative inyonim, and we should see Ach Toiva Chesed, Tamid Kol Hayomim, and the greatest Toiva, Geula Amitas V'Ashlemo, the Mashiach Tzidkeinu. So we'll start off with a question really on the Parshas HaShavua. From a couple of weeks ago, one of the boy came over to me, asked me, when Moshe Rabbeinu is told to split the Yam Suf, the Red Sea, so Hashem says, when it comes to striking the rock to get water. So Hashem says to him, take with the staff with which you struck the river in Egypt. So he asks, but as far as he knows, it was Aaron who split the sea. And I think Rashi mentions in Chumash that the first 3 Makkos were done by Aaron rather than Moshe. And one of the reasons is because Moshe was protected by the water, by the Yoir. Therefore, it wasn't appropriate for him to strike the Yoir. Therefore, Aaron did it. So back to the question, if that's the case, why does Hashem say to Moshe, take the staff with which you smote the river? And so I did a bit of homework and came up with a Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Tes Omid Beis, and it says the following: Omer Rebbe Avohu, Kol HaMaaseh Es Chaveiroi, one who forces, coerces, one who has influences, whichever word you want to use, Kol HaMaaseh Es Chaveiroi, one who causes that his friend Malo Lidvar Mitzvah to perform a mitzvah, Malo Lov HaKosuv Ki'ilu Asor. Then we have the idea that the Gabe, who kind of gets people to give tzedakah, it's as if he himself has done the giving to tzedakah. Shenema, where do we see this? And Hashem says to Moshe, take with the staff with which you struck the river. It was done by Moshe. No, sorry, it was done by Aaron, not by Moshe. This tells us, one who somehow coerces his fellow to perform a mitzvah, then let's consider as if he himself did it, which is, I find, also quite remarkable that, after all, we're talking about before Matan Torah. So the concept of Shlucha Shel Adam K'Moshe hasn't been introduced yet. So to say that Aaron is doing so as a shliach of Moshe, and Shlucha Shel Adam K'Moshe, that may not have been adequate. We have here a different idea that Aaron was doing so as a mission, as Moshe persuaded him to do it, and therefore it's attributed as if Moshe himself had smitten the sea, the river in Mitzrayim, to make it turn to blood. Let's move on to a halacha question. So there is a well-known rabbi who is totally deaf. He is very active in helping other deaf people to Torah and to learn, and he communicates very well through sign language, can text, but he's totally deaf. I'm not even sure whether he manages to hear with a machine. I understand he doesn't even hear with a machine, with a hearing aid. He manages to communicate through sign language very well. And when he speaks, he also doesn't speak coherently. With difficulty, you can understand what he's saying, perhaps, but he's not really comfortable. It's not comfortable to hear it, to listen to him. And so the question is, can such a person be make up for a minyan? And number two, could he make a minyan for Chazos Hashatz, which will go into a slightly different halacha? And thirdly, to be called up to the Torah. So we're looking here at Siman Nun Hey. That's why does it? Siman Nun Hey is where the dinim of Kaddish are discussed. The first Kaddish in the schedule of the day would be after Yishtabach, before Yetzer Or, and that's where we have a lot of discussion about what makes up a minyan, etc. So here we have this detail. One who's deaf, but he can speak. Or he can hear, but he is mute. They've got the status of regular people. They do constitute, they can make up the minyan, and even though they're not answering, well, the deaf one is not answering because he couldn't hear. The mute one is not answering because he can't speak. And nevertheless, it makes up a minyan. Even if there's two or more in the minyan, you got a minyan of 10 men, and two of them are deaf or mute. So long as the majority are regular, intelligent people, so then the minority's answering is not imperative. So long as they are over bar mitzvah, that is as far as it goes for Kaddish, etc. If, however, the Chazan has already davened a quiet Shemona Esrei, and now he's repeating Shemona Esrei because there is the idea of Chazos Hashatz, the Hoitzias Sheini Boki. You cannot repeat the Shemona Esrei. Then you need to have 9 people who are listening and answering Amen. So these people who are either deaf or mute will make up a minyan for Kaddish, will not make up a minyan for Chazos Hashatz in a regular format. Okay, that's all when they have, but they have one of the two. They have either hearing or speaking. But if the person has neither ability, neither to hear nor to speak, then he's got the status like an imbecile or to a child. All over we have in Shas, a person who's a deaf mute is considered that he doesn't communicate normally, and therefore is considered like a person who has no intelligence. Now, the irony here is that this person is an intelligent person and communicates well through artificial means, and that's really the question here. Does his communicating in artificial means, or in unconventional means, does that change the halacha? I just want to, before going further, I want to say that there is a lashon in Gemara that if you cause someone harm, you have to pay. There's a whole thing, you talk damage in this limb, that organ, you have to pay, reimburse for the loss of limb, etc. Then the lashon of the Gemara is cheishoi noisin kuloi. If you assaulted someone and you caused them to lose their hearing, you have to pay the value of an entire person. It's not that they lost their ears. They lost the whole Menschlichkeit. I saw on Tangedag, my father, Allah Shalom, once his hearing deteriorated, he wasn't the same person at all. He couldn't communicate, couldn't hear very well. And so that's this idea that a person, well, what we're seeing in halacha is if a person can't hear but can speak, is still considered starved to a minion, etc. Okay. But just coming back to our Nanukuda, what about artificial communication? Does that change the halacha? Does it mean that he's not a cheresh? So what I'm seeing is, particularly, I mean, this what you have on the screen is from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch. You have the Sefer, which I use a lot, is a Sefer on medical halacha. It's called Nishmas Avraham, from Avraham, Dr. Avraham Sefer Avraham. And he goes to the whole Shulchan Aruch wherever there's a union of medical issue and relating to halacha. So at any rate, so he brings from Rav Moshe Feinstein and from Rav Adi Yosef and from Rav Waldenberg and from Rav Shlomo Zalman. And what I'm seeing, the general drift is that he would make up a minion. And the reason being that does the artificial communication, well, look, he does communicate. And therefore, to say that he's out of touch is not true. He is in touch with people. Therefore, in the svara is a strong svara to say that it's mitzvah. In addition, even if you want to be, dig in and say, oh, but you can't hear, it's only through a machine. All right. The answer would be that the concept of a minion is a din d'rabbanan. It doesn't say, although it's mesa smachta of mosel la'eda hara, but the concept of a minion is basically a din d'rabbanan. And therefore, in a din d'rabbanan, one can afford to take the more lenient view and say that this person is mitzvah for a minion. We saw clearly for Chazor Sashatz, he would not be able to make up the minion. For Aliyah L'Torah also would be a problem because he cannot say a bracha in an intelligible, in a coherent way. So the shliach who asked me this question, he says, well, actually, I am the Bal Koire, and what I'm going to do is I'll call him up and I'll say the bracha along with him. And this way, that's not a problem because really, what the person says, if he wants to say the bracha gesundheit, but meanwhile, what the tzibur will hear is from the Bal Koire, and we've discussed this before. That there is a svara discussed in Tzemach Tzedek and in Orach Chaim Lamed Hey that the bracha at Kriyas HaTorah is really the Bal Koire's bracha. He's the one who's doing the reading in public. It's just that he allows the privilege for the person who is called up to say the bracha. So certainly, if the Bal Koire says the bracha, it's legitimate. The only thing I would say, perhaps that Bal Koire shouldn't have another aliyah the same morning. Let's move on to the next question, and that is quite an unusual question of a kohen who happens to work as a courier. He drives around stuff and so he also drives around. He's got jobs in the medical world, and so sometimes he's asking the question: what happens if he's given a human organ, human skin, to transport from A to B? So here's very interesting. I wasn't sure what were they asking about, from a live human or for a dead human. So, for example, there could be a case, I don't know, I'm not in this field, but let's say there would be a kidney transplant. So the kidney has to be taken from A to B. So the truth is, in that case, he would be allowed to transport it. And let's explain this. You can see here in the Rambam, this is in Rambam, you can see in the sources, in Rambam, in Hilchos Tumas Meis, page base, that an aver, an organ which has been separated from a human being, so that's got a status of as if it's like a dead person, and a kohen would be tomei. Everyone would be tomei. It's for a kohen. It's an avera min Torah for him to make himself tomei. According to most poskim, I say according to most poskim because some poskim take the view that since the kohen now is already tomei in any case, to make himself more tomei, Some poskim say that that's not, I mean, HaTorah is midrabon. At any rate, but a kohen man mustn't make himself tamei. That we know. Every kohen knows that. And so Aver minachai. But the definition of Aver, is only if it's got three components. It's got bosor, it's got flesh, it's got gidim, sinews, va'atzomos, and bones. So a finger, a foot, these are called avorim. Very, very interesting that the lungs and the heart and the kidneys, etc., all of these are not called avorim in halacha because they do not have bone. And so why is it so interesting? Because I think we've discussed this once before. When we make a mishaberach for a chayla, a Rahman litzlan, so we say Shlema b'ramach evora v'shasa gido. So you're asking about for his 248 limbs. Now, technically, unfortunately, many illnesses do not affect the bone type of limb. It's talking about organs. They're talking about the inner organs, which are lahalocha not called evarim. So, all right, that's a discussion on its own. Why do we word the mishaberach in this way? But coming back to our point, that if it were a human organ, which is or skin, which does not have from a live person, then that would not have a tumor, and he would be allowed to transport this. However, if it were the same human or piece, which is from a dead body, then he would be tamei, and the kohen wouldn't be allowed to transport this. So let's read that in the second part of the Rambam in Halacha Daled. Eiver hapoirish min hameis, an organ separated from a dead body. It's like a whole body. And then he says, chosar atzmoi, if a bit of the bone is missing from that organ, im nisha alo bosa kazayis, if there's a kazayis of flesh, metame kemes shalom. So what we're seeing here is that as from a dead human, even a kazayis of flesh is going to make the person who carries it tamei. And therefore I don't see any leeway for the kohen to be able to be a courier for human parts if they are from a dead person. The only thing I could think of is if the kohen, if he's driving a van which has got a cab at the back, a cabin which is separate from the cab where he sits, then perhaps he'd be allowed to drive the van because it's in a different oil. That might be a way, but then also he would not be allowed to lift the box from the van into the building, from the building into the house, into the van. It would be really quite awkward because by lifting it, there's a tumas maso. By lifting it, never mind oil, there's a tumas maso, and that we wouldn't be able to, so that he wouldn't be allowed to carry it. Then it takes it to the house, it's going to be into the building, the tumas oil. So really, it doesn't seem to be a suitable job for a kohen to be a courier for pathological paraphernalia, if that's the right word. Okay. So comes up somehow in some conversation about putting on tefillin with a man who hasn't put on tefillin today, and it's now after sunset. Is it? But it's Friday, so it's going to Friday night. So generally, we've gone through this before, perhaps. There's a machloikus whether Laila's man tefillin or Laila lav's man tefillin. That's because of the posuk v'shamarto sachuka hazois miyomim yamimo. In the parsha of Kadesh, you should regard this statute miyomim yamimo. Does that refer to tefillin? That tefillin should only be done by day, miyomim yamimo. And indeed, the Yerushalmi says that when a man takes off his tefillin towards the evening, he would make a bracha, and we in Volet Sion, well, that's officially the earliest spot where about taking off the tefillin. So we have here this loshon Shenishmechokecha ba'olam hazeh v'niska v'nichya. So there is a svara that this is instituted because of the removing of the tefillin. That's according to the Yerushalmi, who holds that wearing tefillin by night is excluded because of shamarta sachuka hazois b'yomim yomima. But the Bavli, etc., certainly does not follow that. And we hold that, we paskin that Lailo Zman tefillin. In HaTorah, you do have the mitzvah of tefillin at night also. It's only because of that you might come to fall asleep whilst wearing the tefillin, and once you fall asleep, you don't have control of the functions of your body, and therefore you might be violating the respect for the tefillin, and that's why we don't wear tefillin at night. But that's all true for a weekday night. But for Shabbos, then we learn separately that Shabbos is lavzman tefillin. Therefore, there's a difference between any other evening and Friday night. So now what we're going to read on the screen is from the Alter Rebbe's Siddur. And he writes, Ein lohoniach tefillin achar techilas hashkia. As you know, the whole thing of Rabbeinu Tam and the Goinim, number one. And number two, we also know when it says Shkia, does it mean the beginning of Shkia, the end of Shkia? And that's a whole discussion when it comes to benching Chanukah licht. Mitzvos mishatishka hachamo. Does it mean the end of Shkia, beginning of Shkia? And that's why we are noyeg to say mishatishka means for the beginning of Shkia. That's why we light menorah right after Shkia, right after Mincha, right after Shkia. But to Yotze, the other shitta, that it might be Mishatishka means from the end of Shkia. That's why instead of having it burning 30 minutes, which is the way it's recommended in the Gemara, we make it a minimum of 50 minutes, so that even if Mishatishka means from the end of Shkia, so then we give it another 20 minutes or more, depending on whatever the circumstances are, but that's the cheshbon of the 50 minutes which is written in Sefer HaMinhagim. So coming back, the Alter Rebbe is writing here in the Siddur not to put on tefillin after Tchilas HaShkia, at the beginning of sunset. But nevertheless, im hoyu olo mikoidim, if you were wearing tefillin from earlier, ein tzorich l'cholza. You're not mechuyev to remove them. Before going further, I have to stop and tell you this little story that one time the Rebbe pulled up. It was the earlier years, and he was coming back from the Oyel, and he saw this bocher was wearing tefillin out just outside 770, and the Rebbe made some kind of comment of it being slightly inappropriate, and not to the bocher, but to the driver. And so I think it was Rabbi Krinsky who said, "After this Rabbeinu Tams." So the Rebbe said, "Ich ken seine Chushim with das Rashes." Rebbe says, I know this Bach, and according to the way I know his personality, this is Rashi's tefillin. Call upon him. So if you're wearing it before, you don't have to stop. No, it's a Chatzadik Gomer. I'll call upon him. The Alter Rebbe continues, Ki im be'erev Shabbos be'erev Yom Tov. Shetzorech lecholzon lifnei ashkia. By contrast, on Friday, there is a duty to take them off. And before sunset, Zman ma. Koidim shemadlikin haneires be'erev Shabbos. A little bit of time, some time before the time of lighting the candles on Erev Shabbos on Friday before sunset. And this is based upon the famous Gemara in Shabbos, which talks about when they would, I think it's Chaf Aleph, but maybe a bit further, about Sheish Tkiyas Hayutoikin, that there was a customary to have 6 Tkiyas on a Friday towards nightfall, towards sunset. The first one was to alert the people out of the fields to pack up, and the second one was for the shopkeepers in town, and the third one was to tell the people to and to take off tefillin, and then the fourth one is the time for Hadlokas Haner, and then it's Tkiya Trua Tkiya, and then it's Shabbos. So you see clearly in that Gemara, the taking of the tefillin is a little bit before Adlokas Haner, and that's the Alter Rebbe's source, which is very interesting. That when I looked around, other poskim don't bring this word of the tefillin should be removed a little bit before Shkia. Coming back to our question, is there a justification if a person hasn't put on tefillin? Well, we have here a halacha. The halacha is that you don't put on tefillin, especially at Friday night, a regular night. So then there is a halacha. And it says in the Gemara, Svara, that halacha ve'ein moedin kain. You can't paskin that you can put on at night. But there is, I said, I just got a question this week. Someone who is mamish in his life, very very frail. They don't know whether he'll live till the next morning. And could he put on tefillin with him at night? No. I can't say you're allowed to, but I can say that he says in the Gemara, halacha ve'en moedin kain, yeah. So there is leeway on that. And when it comes to Shabbos, so we have that Shabbos one doesn't put on tefillin. Let's move on. This is going to be an interesting one, and that is this is a Lubavitch Shahid he's in Europe. His father lives in Eretz Yisrael, has become very frail, and needs to have a live-in carer to help with his medical, with hygiene, etc. All right. So the live-in carer means that in the house they're going to designate a room, and this will be the carer's room. The carer says that he is a Catholic, and he's a devout Catholic, prays every day, and so the son asks me. He says, "I want to know lechatchila. I don't want to have cutting corners. Is there a problem if this Catholic carer will come in and put up a tzelem, etc., put up a cross in the house, worship, etc.?" So he asked me, and my first reaction was that it's not a problem, but then I said, I'll look into it. And looking into it, I'm not so comfortable with it. Yeah, as I say, he's asking for lechatchila. We're not talking about cutting corners, he's asking for lechatchila. So we have here, this is in Shulchan Aruch, Siman Yeredeya, this is in Siman Kuf Nun Aleph, and we have Sif Ches says, one shouldn't be selling a home to a goy, to Eved Avodah Zarah, nor fields in Eretz Yisrael. You shouldn't, because that's a concept of lois chonem. Do not give them, do not an encampment. Don't give them the ability to settle in Eretz Yisrael. Aval maskirim lohem batim. You're allowed to rent out houses to them, but not fields. Okay, and now let's scroll down to Seif Yud. Even where there is permission to rent out a house to a goy, that's only as a warehouse, but you wouldn't be allowed to rent out premises for a dwelling, because he's going to bring in an idol into your dwelling, and so you are giving accommodation for an Avodah Zarah. Now, I can't see it on the screen now, but this is where it applies in Chutz La'aretz also. Then we have the Ramah, who kind of backtracks on this, and he says, nowadays, it's common for Jews to rent dwellings to Goyim, even as dwellings, not just as warehouses. And why so? So he says, because it's not common for people to bring an idol into their homes. That is what the Ramos says. He lived about 450 years ago, and that's what he says. So then on this point, this fact, this assumed fact of the Ramo, so the Shach, that you can see on the left of the screen, in Yud Zayin, he says, that's hardly the case. Kosher, the Chachazin, we see that people, that Goyim do bring in idols into their homes. And to say that nowadays their whole worship is not considered Avodah Zarah is a bit difficult to say. And he says perhaps in the time of the Ramah, which was 100 years earlier, perhaps, or less, perhaps it wasn't so common for Goyim to bring getchkas, to bring idols into their homes. But the things have changed. So he comes up with another explanation. So he says, there's another teretz which the Rosh says, that although rental doesn't mean sale. So it's your house. You are accommodating Avodah Zarah. He says, however, because we're in Chutz La'aretz and we are bound by the civil law, In the civil law, a rental is dealt with the same as a sale. And even if your own home, the landlord's home collapsed, he doesn't have a civil, in civil court, he won't be able to evict the tenant because he sold it. The contract of a rental is dealt with the same power as a contract for a sale. On that basis, it's not your house. So again, what the Rosh is saying is what the Shach is adopting, that why is it okay? Why is it okay to rent premises to Goyim who will bring in Avodah Zarah? Because they are as if it's not your house anymore. It's rented to them. It's as if it's their house, not yours. And therefore, it's okay for them to bring in Avodah Zarah. So coming back to our question, we're talking about bringing in a carer. I find it difficult to see the logic, to rationalize that the carer is a tenant. The carer is a carer, and the perk of the whatever practical need, but it's nothing. There's no contract on the rental, and as a result, I don't see a heter if he brings in an Avodah Zarah. So let's say he was a Hindu and start bringing in little idols, etc. So that would be a problem. And so then it comes back to our question: if he's a Catholic and starts bringing in a cross, is the cross considered an article of Avodah Zarah? So that we're going to deal with. Right. So let's now go to the next slide, and we'll see what the status of a cross is. So here we have in the Ramo, I think it's in Simon Ben Aleph, and he says the following: Shesi ve'erev, a cross, shemishtachavim loi, which is bowed down to, dinoi kedin selim, is like an image, an idol, v'osur b'loi bitl, and therefore it's also bad. Aval shesi ve'erev, shetoilin betzavor lezikoren, shebo mimkoim isaya. But if people wear a cross around their neck, that's just to say that it's a sign of their affiliation. Loi mikrit selim. This is not called a worshipped image. Umuter, therefore it's muter bahanoa, etc. So that's why I especially spoke about if they put up a cross to bow down to worship. If it's a cross which is just an ornament, not for worship, then that would change the halacha. That would be okay. Yeah. Right. Now, I did a little bit of searching on this, and I came across this sefer, which alerted me to this. You can see on the right of the screen, Hasocher v'hakablim b'Shabbos. It's a very contemporary sefer, all about landlords and etc., and primarily about Shabbos. But he also has a whole chapter about Avodah Zarah and accommodating, etc., which I found very helpful. Right, let's go on to our next question. So our next question: are piercings forbidden as chukas hagoy? So someone asked me this question that he was asked by a girl. He says she's a frum girl, but she's asking about putting a nose ring and an extra earring and a ring in her belly. I asked, I don't understand. If she's a frum girl, what is the point of having a ring in your belly that's covered in any case? Is it also? So the answer is also, yeah. Chukas hagoy. Yeah. So interesting. I think it's the obvious, yeah. But as the girl is asking, is it also? So now, looking here in Simon Kufay and Ches in Yeridei, the definition of chukas hagoy. So we have here not to have a haircut like a goyish haircut. And one goes into details what was common then. Don't build buildings which resemble the churches. Well, that's another discussion, yeah? And then it goes, the Ramo says, one should be distinct from the goyim with clothing and other things. וכל זה אינו אוסר אלא בדבר שנהגו בו הגויים לשום פריצס. This which we say chukas hagoy is when the goyim are doing this in a way of, how would you say the word pritzus, of, I don't know the word promiscuity is the right word, but they're doing it, all right, to show a lack of restraint in a more in immoral way, etc. Hagoy shenagu, for example, shenagu lilbeish malbushim adumim, that they would wear bright red clothing. Wearing bright red clothing, we know that Eden don't wear that, and that seems to be the background for this, that it's red is very eye-catching. And I remember once by Kinder's Hashluchim, this is 20 years ago or more, and Rabbi Kunin, so he was upset. He saw some of the people wearing, then it was popular, these crimson, these bright red ties was the fashion then. He was upset that he saw some of the shluchim also wearing that type of thing, which is probably coming from here. I'll give you an example. Let's say wearing jeans which have got a couple of tears on the knees, lower than the knee, above the knee, whatever. That is, in my mind, it's a fashion. It's a concept of preachers. It's a preachers of saying, I've got this certain rough type of behavior, rough type of nature, and I'm available, whatever it may be, but there's some kind of message there. And that's what the preachers are. So certainly the ring in the belly, I think definitely is that. And I think also a ring in the nose, or the other piercings, I think they're all saying a certain a message of a certain priestess, of Zlosenkeit, and that wouldn't be okay. So
But
coming
Rivka
back to
wore a
the
nose
previous
ring.
question, someone's asking if a carer brings in a Quran and leaves it in our house. Well, that's an interesting point. Islam is not a Vedazan. This is something, I think, well-known concept that they believe in Hashem. That's the only positive thing about it. But that wouldn't be an item of Avodah Zarah. Yeah. So what would you do with it? I don't know, but it's not an item of Avodah Zarah. Right. Let's go on to the next question, for which I do not have a proper source. So someone's asking that Rivka wore a nose ring. That's true. And you have the concept of nose. The idea of nose rings is mentioned in Torah several times. The answer is that in those times it was an accepted thing. It was a normal thing, and there's an expression afal pisha ahuva b'mei ha'ovis snua b'mei habon. There are things which there was a time when they were accepted and they were positive things, and now they are by the association. And no one puts on a nose ring because they want to emulate Rivka Imenu. I think that's the Dover Haposha. Yeah. So now, as I say, I do not have a source for the following, and that is about saying a bracha with a little child. From what age could they say a bracha with Hashem's name? So we do know, it says in Hayom Yoim, that from the age of 3, they start training the child to wear yarmulke and to wear tzitzis and to say brachas. Some people start earlier. Some children are able to speak earlier. So my question here is, if the child is not clean, they're still wearing a nappy, a diaper, and so then I think it's a bit premature to say a bracha properly with Hashem's name. So I'm just looking in Siman Ayin Ches and in Erechai, I'm talking about saying brachas. Now we have a posuk. Everyone's familiar. Then when Eden went to battle, so it says that you should have with you a spade, and when you need to relieve yourself, so then you should go out of the machne and you should recover, and then you cover it up, And he says, Ki Hashem Elokecho mishalach bekerv machanecho, uhoyo machanecho kodosh, v'leyire b'cho ervas dovo v'shov me'acharecho. There is an idea that to mention Hashem's name, there has to be kedushas hamachane. There has to be a state of kedusha in the environment, and therefore, if there's we're not allowed to say brach in the presence of human excrement because of machanech hakodesh. And then we have, even if it's covered, but if it's attached to the body, and that's what we're reading over here in Shulchan Aruch, if a person is dressed, if they have tzoya, which is outside the body, but in the by the back, so then it wouldn't be allowed to say a bracha. And I guess even if you can't smell anything, but because it's a violation of kedushas hamokim, saying a bracha. So I think that a child which is not yet, as I say, I haven't seen this anywhere, just in contemporary sforim. But I think at that age, it would be appropriate to make with them brachas, but like baruch atah adoi, something like that, but not saying the Hashem's name until they are able to look after their own cleanliness. Let's move on to the next thing, and that is a couple of things left on our list. We'll be a bit shorter than usual. Baruch Hashem had a busy week. We had a simcha on Motzei Shabbos, last Motzei Shabbos in New York, and so Baruch Hashem. So less time to be hoige b'Torah as usual. So thank you. So now, what we did discuss a couple of weeks ago was about Birchas HaGoimel, if there's an expiry date. And I brought sources which say that there is an expiry date. So my son-in-law in Chicago sent me a reference copy of this piece from the Sdei Chemed. So the Sdei Chemed is an encyclopedia written by Chizkiyahu Medini, he was a contemporary of the Rebbe Rashab, and post-war was this encyclopedia was published by Kahos, by Kahos, with the scene for the need to provide this kind of access for this information for Rabbonim and Halacha. At any rate, so you've got the Sdei Chemed is divided into two main sections. One is Kuntres HaKlolim, which is more Lomdus. Then we've got Mareches Hadinim, which is more Halacha. At any rate, so he brings here this discussion about whether there is an expiry date to Birchas HaGoimel, and he gives here a reference to the Divrei Nehemiah, who says that saying Birchas HaGoimel even later, that's okay, although there is a recommendation to say within the first 3 days, but that's a recommendation, that's not an expiry date. He brings here also Shita Mekubetzes, who says Mazutro Kol Heicha de Leka Asara. Now, for the Birchas HaGoimel, you need to have 10 people, 10 men. Then he brings there svara that you should wait. You don't have 10 people, wait for 30 days. You might be able to do it then. And then now I find it very interesting. He says, after that, you should say it even b'yochid, which is very interesting. He's saying that you can say it b'yochid. Pashas, it has to have a minyan. But he's saying up till Lamed Yom. Okay, so we're seeing here that there are definitely sources, although the sources I quoted then say that there is an expiry date. Now, those who say clearly that you can say it even at a later point. I just want to kind of perhaps a bit of to differentiate that if it's a Birchas HaGoimel because a person went through an ordeal of a medical thing, etc., that doesn't fade so fast. That's what here we're talking about a person who traveled, and I think there's a difference between the Birchas HaGoimel after a medical ordeal to a travel where one is more enduring. I think the feeling, etc. I can see a difference, but all right, fine. There are those. We have one of our neighbors came in once here in Lubavitch. He usually davens in another shul. He came into our shul to say Birchas HaGoimel because he says in his shul They don't say Birchas HaGoimel on traveling with an airplane. You can see in Pesach Shuvas there are those who don't see air travel as warranting Birchas HaGoimel. So in Lubavitch we know we do if it's air travel across the sea, but nevertheless I can see kind of when with this delay, etc. I can see the argument to say that it's completely obsolete, completely forgotten. Well, all right. Let's go on another 2 points, and that is about last week. If you remember, I spoke about a woman who's expecting multiple birth, and will have to. The hospital are insisting on that they'll have to supplement the milk, and they're going to use the milk which they have the regular baby's milk which they have. Now, so then I mentioned about from Rav Frank, who was Rav Yerushalayim, Har Tzvi, how he talks about lactose and milk powder, and he wants to use the same heter which applies to butter. He wants to use for milk powder also. So last night I read through the Har Tzvi. It's in Yerdeh, as I said, Kuf Gimel, Kuf Dalet. What he's saying is the following: when there is the Lashon in Gemara that Cholov Tomei Einoi Oimed, you can't make butter or cheese from non-kosher milk. It doesn't mean it's not possible. Now, this fellow, if someone sent me some research that you can make cheese, you can make from milk powder, you can make from any mammal's milk, you can make cheese or something from the milk. When the Gemara says Cholov Tomei Einoi Oimed, so Rav Frank explains that it doesn't mean it's not possible. What it means is that every milk has got a water content and it's got a solid content. The cow's milk has got a high proportion of solids, and therefore you'll produce a reasonable amount of cheese from X amount of milk. The same amount of milk from another species, from a pig or from a camel, will apparently produce much less. It'll produce much less cheese per measure. That's what he's. I mean, I didn't check this out. I find it very interesting because my impression is actually that camel's milk is actually thicker and creamier than cow's milk. But that's one point. Rabbi Pink, who is very involved in commercial kashrus, he also challenged. He raised a couple of points about this baby's milk, about relying on the heter equivalent to butter. He says, first of all, by the way, today's butter, you can't rely on the heter in Shulchan Aruch because there's various other ingredients added to butter which are not necessarily kosher. So butter would also need to have a hechsher. It doesn't have to be b'shas chaliv, it can be b'shas asiyah, but it has to have a hechsher that they don't put other ingredients which aren't kosher. And he says the baby's milk is also, they have added ingredients. So besides the cholav akum issue, whether it's cholav Yisrael or not, but there's also, what about the other ingredients? And then he told me another interesting point. To make milk powder, and I understand that the baby's milk is made with milk powder, so there's something called a spray dryer. Apparently a spray dryer is as tall as a 3-floor building, and it's like a kind of oven, and it's the fluid goes through in this large chamber, and it's changed from a liquid into a powder. That's what the spray dryer. Now this is a very expensive facility, and then it's very common for the same facility to be used for other products. And so you say it's milk, it's cholav stam. But what was the machinery used for yesterday? And technically, they are so large that to kasher these facilities, these spray dryers, is very, very difficult to kasher them. And so the answer to all of this is that talking about a baby's milk or milk powder, etc., it would need to have some kind of hechsher. There's different levels of hechsher. There's a kind of approval, which means perhaps they've visited the plant and seen that everything is okay. And then you have something which is called a certification, where the kashrus authority meets up and makes a contract with the factory that if they're going to change the ingredients, they're going to have to inform them. So that's a more solid type of hechsher. Well, at any rate, so the message here is that this milk, which we want to say is okay because of the need, would have to have a hechsher of sorts, that it's not used. They're not using the same equipment for non-kosher stuff, and that they know non-kosher ingredients. It happens to be that the milk which we're talking about is on the London Best and list, so that's okay. Right. One last point, which is not on our list, and that is, as I was on duty at the Beis Horoah on Stamford Hill on Friday morning, someone asked me a question which I've never had before, and that was that someone was davening Shacharis, and then I think he had finished Shema, and he was by Emes V'Yatziv, and then he answered Kedusha perhaps or something, and then he forgot, and he started Shemona Esrei. So he hasn't said the bracha of Emes V'Yatziv till Goal Yisrael. And now he's finished Shemona Esrei. Does he say the bracha? So I told him that in Svori he should say it. But and then I looked up my Sefer Shkiyos Miyovin, which is all about mistakes in davening. And so here he quotes from the Birkei Yosef in Siman Samach Vov. It's quoted briefly in the Mishnah Brura in Siman Samach Vov. I think I've mentioned before the Birkei Yosef from the Chido. He tends to be much more of a malakeh. He's quoting various forum. We're going to read what he has to say. Right. He was davening in the Azora, I guess he means in the shul, and before he came to Shira Chadosha, the Sefer Torah was taken out in the shul, and so he fell silent because he now sees the Sefer Torah being carried. And then he was confused, and he did not finish off, and he just started Shemona Esrei. And others, I guess he discussed his predicament with others, and they scoffed at him and says, "Why did you stop to look at the Sefer Torah? Do your own thing." And I say to them that actually he was right. He should have stopped. He was to stop to look at the Sefer Torah was the right thing. I'm going on to the second column. Harav HaChaviv. Now, who is the Chaviv? I don't remember now. I didn't research this. And Gedolim Mizoi, further, the Rav says there that he holds that if he stops in the middle of Birchas Krishma, he should say B'zoi Satorah, which very interesting because I don't think we would follow that. By the way, this is by the Sfardim, but they do Hagbe before Kriyas HaTorah. But this Elo the High Gavr Israbei Hanishkach Kedain. He's very poetic here. He's quoting obviously Lashonis of the Posuk of Psukim. But this fellow had the fact that he stopped to acknowledge the Sefer Torah was perfectly appropriate, but then he had forgotten to say the end of the bracha. So what should he do now? So yeah, he says Poshut that after Shemona Esrei he should say Shema again, and then say Emes V'Yatziv till Goal Yisrael. That's what he's recommending. So not only to say the bracha, but to say also Shema again. And then he quotes also from Mari Yaakov Castro, in his notes in Siman Samach Gimel Shulchan Aruch, that he has the following: the fellow ein pnai lihispalel. If for some reason he's under pressure, he doesn't have time to daven Shemona Esrei, he should say Shema till Emes, and then he'll take a break because he doesn't have time to daven Shemona Esrei. Then he'll when he has time to daven Shemona Esrei, he will say Emes V'Yatziv and then go straight into Shemona Esrei. And this way he's Seimer Geula L'Tefillah. That's also very surprising psak. At any rate, he says for sure it's talking about onus harbe. It must have been a very extenuating circumstances to allow him to take a break after Shema before Shemona Esrei. At any rate, but it comes back to our question. If a fellow, for some reason, started Shemon Esrei and hasn't said Emes V'Yatziv, so then after Shemon Esrei, he recommends he should say Shema again and then say Emes V'Yatziv all the way till Goal Yisrael. And with this, I'll finish off. We should be zeicher to see the Goal Yisrael, Geulas Yisrael from the Golus, and we should see Yeshua for Klal Yisrael with Mashiach Tzidkenu, and we should hear the Besura Toivo from Eliyahu Hanavi, the Higiyas Man Gulaschem, and we should see this V'Sechazeno Inein V'Shuv Kol Tzim Barachamim. Agutavach.
Sure.
Oh,